Bon, on va passer à la deuxième partie de Tea Time. Bon, et
On va
pour
passer à la
cette
deuxième
partie,
partie de
ça va être
Tea Time.
une histoire en anglais. So for my
Pour
English
cette
folks,
partie,
this is
ça
for
va être
you.
une histoire en anglais.
So for my
This is the first time I'm
English
listening to
folks,
this, so we'll see
this
how
is
it
for
goes.
you.
Books mobile app. Seamlessly track
This is
your
the first time I'm
spending
listening
and
to this, so
easily
we'll
send
see how it
invoices
goes.
on the go. With a few taps, you can add new customers, products, and services. Business and personal expenses are auto-categorized. Simply swipe to adjust them.
What would you do if your entire family showed up with 3 lawyers, laid a thick stack of papers in front of you, and ordered you to sign away a $3 million inheritance, then coldly threatened to destroy the career you built with your own sweat and sacrifice? Welcome to Family Ashes, where family secrets burn down to ash. In that moment, what would you choose? To stay silent in order to preserve a so-called peace that never truly existed, or to stand up and defend the last piece of self-respect you still have? If you've ever felt belittled by your own family, leave a comment. Your story might be the strength someone else is waiting for. My name is Rachel Whitman. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a nurse at a small community hospital in Denver, Colorado. I'm used to 12-hour shifts, sleepless nights at a patient's bedside, and the constant need to prove myself twice over just to be seen as worthy. But the hardest wound to heal was never in the hospital. It was inside the Whitman family itself, where I was only the adopted child brought in as a burden to be carried, never truly counted as blood. Margaret Whitman, my adoptive mother, a sharp and wealthy widow, had long been the one in charge. She ran a $10 million real estate company the same way she ran everyone around her, by keeping them firmly under her control. To her, I was never a daughter. I was simply a stranger she had taken in, someone expected to be grateful for every bite of food and every roof over my head. Yet in that very house, there was one person who looked at me differently. Eleanor Whitman, Margaret's mother-in-law, lived with us for years before she passed. She was the only one who called me granddaughter without hesitation, the only one who made me feel I belonged. And her quiet, steady love would later become the greatest shield that protected me from the storm Margaret and her family had been planning all along. I remember it clearly. That morning I had just finished an overnight shift at the hospital when my phone rang. Seeing Margaret's name flash on the screen, I hesitated, then answered. Her voice came sweet, almost syrupy, so fake I could picture her sitting in her leather chair, lips curled in a calculating smile. Rachel, can you come with me to the law office this afternoon? It's just a small matter, really, just need your signature on a
Be patient, it's coming. It's coming.
light as if she were asking me to dinner. But I had lived long enough under her roof to know, when Margaret said a small matter, it meant a trap had already been set. The steady ticking of the wall clock filled my little apartment, and unease pressed heavy in my chest. With Margaret, nothing was ever simple. I forced out a short reply, I'll come. When the call ended, I sat still for several minutes, trying to steady my breathing. Deep down, I knew she hadn't invited me for something ordinary. Margaret never wasted her time unless it benefited her. As I rose to get ready, my eyes caught my own reflection in the mirror, a tired nurse with dark circles under her eyes, but a gaze sharper than it had ever been. I suddenly heard Eleanor's words from long ago, when she taught me to play chess on quiet afternoons, never trust Margaret when she sounds the sweetest, Rachel. That's when you need to be the most alert. Back then, I had laughed, thinking she was joking. But now, each word echoed in my head like a warning bell for the storm waiting ahead. The 18th floor opened into a long hallway lined with deep green carpet, the gold lights above casting a shine so polished it felt almost sterile. My heels clicked steadily against the floor, each step heavier than the last, as though I were walking into a place where there would be no way back. The receptionist gave me a quick once-over from head to toe before pointing down the hall, not bothering with even the faintest polite smile. Conference room 3. They're waiting for you. The way she stressed the word they sent a chill down my spine. The thick wooden door was shut tight, the handle cold against my palm. I drew in a deep breath, pushed it open, and the air inside struck me in the chest like a blow. The long room was dominated by a gleaming wooden table, sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows turning each face into a stone figure arranged precisely in place. Margaret sat at the head of the table, the posture of someone accustomed to giving orders. Her dark blue dress clung neatly to her frame, fingers interlaced, eyes sweeping over me with the detachment of someone inspecting a commodity. On her right was Daniel, my adoptive brother, white collar crisp, dark tie knotted perfectly, his tight smile carrying the promise that if I said the wrong thing, he would be the first to cut me down. To her left was Sophie, diamond earrings glittering with every slight movement, her back straight as though this were a cocktail reception rather than a family ambush. Neither of them bothered to hide their displeasure at my presence, their eyes assessed me like I was an offense that needed to be corrected. Beside them sat Edward, the uncle, his hair streaked with gray but his eyes still sharp, giving me a brief nod like a man too accustomed to winning to imagine any other outcome. In front of him rested a black leather briefcase with silver clasps gleaming, a reminder of a kind of power I had never been allowed near. And finally, opposite Margaret, 3 men in identical gray suits, like carbon copies stamped from the same mold. They didn't need introductions, their cold eyes and waiting posture said everything. They were there to do the dirty work on the family's behalf, to make sure the adopted child was erased from the equation. The silence pressed down on me, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the racing of my own heart. I realized every seat, every glance, every document had been arranged long before I walked in, a chessboard already set, with me as the disposable pawn. Margaret lifted her chin, her red lips parting slowly. "Rachel, you finally came." She paused, narrowing her eyes like the slice of a blade. "Sit down. We have some papers to discuss." It felt as though the floor was pulling at my feet, but I moved forward anyway, sliding into the chair. The scent of polished wood mixed with expensive perfume caught in my throat. The entire room was a stage, every player rehearsed, waiting only for me to take my place. Spread out in front of me on the glossy wood was a stack of documents clipped neatly inside a cream folder, bright yellow tabs poking out like tiny fingers pointing straight at me. I didn't need to bend closer to see the bold words at the top of the page, transfer of inheritance rights. The faint smell of fresh paper and ink rose up, but in my mind, it was the scent of a trap already sprung. Margaret slid the stack of papers toward me with a motion as casual as if she were handing me a restaurant menu. "All you have to do is sign here, Rachel. This will make everything smoother for everyone." Her voice was soft, but every word dropped heavy as stone. I glanced at Daniel and Sophie, both of them watched me with expectant eyes tinged with challenge, as though they were certain I would finally do what I had always been forced to do, bow my head. Edward leaned back in his chair, his aged but steady hand resting on the folder. "Everything is perfectly legal, Rachel. We just want to be sure there aren't any misunderstandings dragged out." It sounded almost like reassurance, but I knew better. It was the voice of a lawyer too accustomed to victory, cornering me so there was no escape. The 3 men in gray suits all fixed their eyes on me, faces expressionless. One of them tapped his pen rhythmically against the table, like a clock ticking down to the moment I would sign. I rested my hand on the arm of the chair, feeling the sweat bead in my palm, my heart beat so loud it filled my ears. They expected me to tremble and sign immediately, like someone accepting a favor they didn't deserve. But in that moment, I saw more clearly than ever. To them, I was nothing more than a pawn to be wiped off the board at will. I don't know if it was the harsh light of the room or my eyes suddenly blurring, but memories from years ago surged back with a force that nearly took my breath away. I saw again that summer afternoon when Daniel strode out into the yard grinning, Margaret proudly handing him the keys to a brand new black Jeep Cherokee. The polished paint gleamed in the sunlight, the ribbon still tied around it. The whole family crowded around, clapping, cheering, raising glasses. I stood back on the porch, clutching a small cardboard box. When I opened it, I found an old pair of shoes, the soles already worn, with a note scrawled inside, "Be practical, dear." Someone even reminded me I should be grateful to have something to wear. Laughter rang out across the yard, and I bowed my head lower, swallowing the bitter taste rising in my throat. Then I remembered Sophie. The day her Stanford acceptance letter arrived, the entire house erupted. Margaret hugged her so tightly it looked as though she might never let go. tears streaming as she'd probably announced to anyone who would listen, my daughter got into Stanford. For years of tuition, housing, even holiday plane tickets, all paid without a second thought. As for me, those years were a blur of endless shifts, waiting tables in diners, cleaning hotel rooms on weekends, and covering night shifts at the hospital just to scrape together enough for community college. I remembered washing dishes until my hands blistered, eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, and still forcing a smile for my patients the next morning. No one in that house ever asked if I had enough money for school, or even if I had eaten dinner. I was simply there, like a tenant renting space in the house they called family. But maybe the sharpest sting of all came from the photographs that filled the living room walls. They always showed the same 4 smiling faces: Margaret, Daniel, Sophie, and sometimes Edward at holiday gatherings. I remembered once asking about a Christmas photo, the tree glowing, everyone gathered, everyone except me. Margaret answered in a tone that suggested it was self-evident: family pictures need to be consistent, Rachel. You understand that, don't you? I smiled weakly and nodded like the obedient child they wanted, but inside it felt like someone had just extinguished the last small flicker of hope I had. They never forgot to leave me out, and over time, I learned how to make myself invisible. Sitting there that day, staring at the stack of transfer of inheritance rights papers, all those fragments of memory wove themselves together into an old, tattered rug riddled with holes. It reminded me that being pushed to the margins had never been an accident. It had been deliberate, a choice repeated year after year, and now it was happening once again, laid bare on the glossy table before me. Through all those years of being shoved aside, there had been only one person who truly saw me, and it wasn't Margaret, nor Daniel, nor Sophie. It was Eleanor. From the moment she moved into the household, I felt as if I finally had a place to rest my weary shoulders. She called me granddaughter without hesitation, without the word adopted tacked on like a footnote. I remembered one time, when Daniel mocked me and I curled into a corner, she gently took my hand, her voice soft but firm: "Blood doesn't make a family, Rachel. Love does. And you carry more love in your little finger than the rest of them combined." I laughed it off, thinking she was only comforting me, but in her deep eyes I glimpsed a truth I wouldn't fully grasp until years later. Eleanor's love was never just words or the occasional rare hug. She observed, she remembered, and she prepared. Those afternoons in her study, when I thought she was simply playing chess or jotting in a journal, she was quietly revising her will, adding details, securing witnesses, recording footage so that no one could ever dispute her intent. I could still see the day I happened to pass by and spotted 3 strangers in the living room, a doctor, a retired judge, and a familiar priest, signing their names on documents as a video camera rolled in the corner. Eleanor looked up at me and smiled as though it were nothing at all. "Just a few formalities for peace of mind, dear, nothing to worry about." I nodded naively back then, never guessing she had already mapped every move, building a fortress of law to protect me against exactly this day. And now, sitting across from Margaret and her army of lawyers, the pieces snapped together in my mind. Eleanor's gentleness hadn't only been comfort, it had been strategy. She had known there would come a day when I'd face this, and she wanted me to understand I would not be alone. Margaret leaned forward, her long fingers flipping through the pages, her voice steady, cold, like she was reading aloud an announcement rehearsed in advance. "Rachel, your grandmother was confused when she wrote that will. $3 million is not what she truly meant to leave you. You know that. If you sign this, transfer the inheritance back to the family, everything will go smoothly, no need to drag this out." She slid the file toward me.
Let me let me make sure I understand what's going on here. So the girl received $3 million from the grandmother as inheritance, Eleanor. Her mother, Margaret, doesn't want her of the inheritance. So she decides to hire lawyers so that she can have the inheritance instead of her own daughter. Wow. Money make people do things. This is a very interesting situation. Okay, we keep listening.
The corner of her mouth curling upward, her confidence so sharp it made me feel as if there were only 2 options: sign, or destroy myself. Daniel jumped in immediately, his voice thick with contempt. "Exactly. This is family money, not meant for someone on the outside. We are the blood. Sophie chimed in, eyes glistening as though tears were about to fall, but her words cut like glass. Don't you see how unfair this is? Daniel and I are the real children, and yet you walk away with everything? It isn't right. I looked at each face turned toward me, the same people I had eaten alongside for years under one roof, now wielding their shared bloodline as a weapon to cast me out. In that moment, I could hear my heartbeat pounding, every vessel pulsing with defiance. They might share the same blood, but that had never given them the right to treat me as nothing more than an intruder. Edward braced both hands on the table, leaning toward me as if to drown me under the weight of his age and lingering authority. His voice came low, cold, and certain. Rachel, the court will never let this stand. An adopted child suddenly walking away with $3 million while the biological children get nothing? Who do you think a judge will side with? This is clearly undue influence. And if we take this
So there's one detail we need to keep in mind. The lady who's getting the inheritance is an adopted child. Margaret adopted a girl. But the grandmother loved the girl so much that instead of giving her money to her own daughter, she gave it to the adopted granddaughter. So the adopted daughter of her own daughter. Wow. All right then.
court, you won't just lose the money, you'll lose your nursing license. Who would ever hire someone suspected of deceiving and manipulating an elderly woman? He paused, his sharp gaze raking over me as though he could already see me stripped of everything. A sharp clatter broke the silence from across the table. One of the three lawyers, the youngest, carefully opened a slim laptop, the bluish glow washing over his eager face, taut with both nerves and ambition. He swiveled the screen for everyone to see, his tone dripping with confidence, even arrogance. We've already prepared a draft complaint for elder abuse, exploitation and isolation of a vulnerable adult. If you refuse to sign, with a single click this file will be submitted this afternoon. The screen displayed neat paragraphs, dense with statutes and legal codes, cold as if the verdict had already been written. I sat frozen, both hands clamped under the table so tightly my nails dug into my skin. My heart pounded in a furious rhythm, so loud I feared they could hear it. My whole body was strung tight, like a violin's string pulled to the breaking point. My throat was dry, my lips salty with imagined blood, my mind spinning with one searing question: could they really destroy me that quickly? No one in the room bothered to hide their satisfaction. Daniel leaned back in his chair, arms folded, wearing a half-smile as if he were watching a play whose ending he already knew. Sophie pretended to study the documents, but the slight curl at the corner of her mouth betrayed her delight. And Margaret sat still as stone, her eyes gleaming cold as glass, waiting for me to break so she could close the curtain on this performance with victory. Then, just as I thought my heart might burst from my chest, my phone buzzed faintly inside my bag. A tiny vibration, almost imperceptible, yet to me, it sounded like a drumbeat in a silent hall. I lowered my eyes, pretending to adjust the strap, and slid a finger across the screen. A message glowed clear and simple: ready. Wait for the signal. In that instant, the crushing weight in my chest lifted, replaced by a sudden rush of warmth along my spine. For years, I had been dismissed, sidelined, forced to believe I would always stand alone. But here, in this room dripping with intimidation, the truth surged through me like fire. They thought I was prey, but the board had never been theirs alone to control. I drew a deep breath, feeling the invisible walls closing in, then suddenly shoved my chair back. The screech of wood against marble sliced through the air, and the room fell silent as every eye turned toward me. I stood tall, forcing my voice to remain steady, each word deliberate and firm. If you truly want me to sign, then at the very least, my lawyer will be present. For a few seconds, surprise flickered across their faces, then it was drowned out by Margaret's sharp, mocking laugh. She leaned back in her chair, lifting her chin slightly, her eyes sweeping over me like I was a foolish child playing pretend. Your lawyer? She drew out the words, her smile curling into a cruel arc. Rachel, you're a nurse on scraps of a salary, living in a one-bedroom apartment. Do you really think you can afford an attorney? You don't have the money to hire anyone, let alone stand against us. Daniel let out a short, derisive chuckle. You're just putting on a show of bravado, but everyone here knows you've got no one behind you. Sophie raised her hand to her mouth in feigned shock, but I saw the glimmer of a smirk in her eyes. The room buzzed with a mix of pity and scorn, as if I had just uttered the most ridiculous thing they'd ever heard.
I think what really makes Picasso special to our customers is the actual ownership of a property that you care about, that enables you to live a better life. We operate in the business of large, expensive, underutilized assets. If you live in New York, for example, and you want to own a home in Paris, that is a big undertaking that's going to take a long time, a lot of money, lots of flights across the pond. But with Picasso, you can be an owner in Paris tomorrow. My family gets to come out and my mom gets to experience.
I could feel the tremor in my palms, but instead of sitting back down, I held my ground, my gaze steady as it swept across them. They thought I was meant to endure, that my life was defined by solitude. But all I could think about was the message still waiting in my bag, ready. Wait for the signal. For the first time in years, I felt my legs steady beneath me, strong enough to stand without bowing. The conference room door clicked open with a sharp, decisive sound that reverberated through the heavy air. I turned, my heart jolting in my chest. The man who stepped inside moved slowly but with authority, his silver hair gleaming under the lights, his tall frame still commanding even past 60. His navy suit wasn't flashy, but impeccably tailored, every seam speaking of quiet power honed through hundreds of courtroom battles. The worn leather briefcase in his hand shone at the handle, as though it had carried the weight of decades. He paused at the doorway, eyes sweeping the room, not too fast, not too slow, just enough to make every person shiver beneath his gaze. I heard Sophie's hushed whisper of shock, Daniel's sharp intake of breath, and even Margaret's steely mask cracked, a faint tremor betraying itself in her cold stare. Edward adjusted his posture, but the tap of his fingers on the table no longer carried the confidence it once had. Jonathan Pierce dipped his head slightly, stepping forward with unhurried strides, each footfall landing with a weight that seemed to shift the balance of the room. When he stopped at the head of the table, his voice rang out, deep, steady, and resonant like a tolling bell, shattering the suffocating silence. I am Jonathan Pierce, attorney for Mrs. Eleanor Whitman. 2 years ago, she personally retained me to prepare every necessary safeguard, with one purpose alone, to protect Rachel from exactly the situation you are attempting today. For a moment, it felt as though the entire world inside that room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. I saw Margaret's jaw tighten, the veins at her temple throbbing. Daniel, who had leaned back smirking earlier, now sat bolt upright, lips pressed thin. Sophie, usually the best at masking her emotions, fumbled with her handbag strap, panic flickering in her wide eyes. And Edward leaned back, eyes narrowing as he tried to hide his unease behind a mask that was already slipping. In that moment, I could hardly believe what was happening before my eyes. A warmth spread from deep in my chest up through my throat, stinging my eyes with tears I struggled to hold back. Eleanor, the only one who had ever truly defended me, the one who once whispered that love, not blood, was what bound a family, had gone to such great lengths to shield me. She was gone, but her love still stood tall in the form of a silver-haired attorney, stepping into this room like a shield between me and an entire family determined to crush me. My heart hammered wildly, but for the first time since I had stepped onto the 18th floor of that tower, I could breathe. I was no longer the isolated girl cornered by threats. I had her, in another way, as if she were sitting in that room still, looking Margaret straight in the eye and whispering to me, "You are not alone." The air shifted the instant Jonathan Pierce finished speaking. The suffocating silence that had pressed down on me seemed to drift across the table, settling heavily on Margaret and Edward instead. I saw the arrogant confidence that usually clung to Margaret's face begin to crack. Her eyes blinked more rapidly, her lips pressed so tight her red lipstick smeared into a thin, uneven line. Her posture stayed rigid, but beneath the table I noticed her hand clenching, knuckles blanching white. Edward, the uncle who had long thrived on playing the seasoned legal tactician, the one always pouring fuel on the fire, couldn't muster a single word. His eyes darted away and back again, as though already measuring how fast he might retreat. Never had I seen him this silent, and his silence spoke louder than any argument he might have delivered. Daniel cast a quick glance at Margaret, searching for direction, but all he found was her furrowed brow and tight jaw. Sophie sat frozen, fingers twisting together under the table, the diamond on her ring trembling with every nervous shake of her hands. And that was when it struck me, the balance of power had shifted. For so long, I had been the one anxious, always cornered while they staged their ambushes. Yet in a single instant, the presence of one calm, silver-haired man had tipped the scales. I saw the stillness in Margaret's and Edward's eyes, and beneath it, a truth they would never speak aloud. This time, they had miscalculated. Jonathan took his time. He laid out documents and video files as if placing chess pieces precisely on a board, then closed his briefcase softly, leaving his hand resting on it, a subtle signal that much more remained inside, waiting. I heard Sophie's uneven, shallow breaths across the table. Daniel tried to mask his nerves by drumming his fingers, but the rhythm faltered, erratic, betraying his unease. Margaret stayed rigid, her back perfectly straight, but her fist had tightened so fiercely that the knuckles gleamed bone-white. She cast a quick glance toward Edward, searching for solidarity, but he only lowered his head, his aging eyes avoiding hers, already cornered himself. I had never seen them like this, the ones who always commanded, who always held the upper hand, now sitting mute before a handful of documents Eleanor had left behind. The air had grown so dense that the smallest sound was enough to jolt everyone. Then came the sharp click of a briefcase snapping shut. One of the three men in gray suits rose from his chair. Adjusting his tie, he spoke with a gravelly but clear voice, each word dropping like a gavel strike. "I'm sorry. I cannot continue with this case." His eyes flicked toward Margaret, regretful, perhaps, but resolute. "There is ample evidence here to show that my client has not been fully truthful. To proceed would violate the ethical standards of my profession." The words cut through the room like a blade. Margaret's mouth opened, but only a heavy breath escaped instead of the sharp retort she intended. Sophie turned her face away, a muffled sob breaking from her lips. Daniel scowled, his eyes locked on the pile of documents as if sheer willpower might erase them. Edward let out a weary sigh, one that carried the weight of defeat, as though even he could see every escape route collapsing. In that moment, a wave swelled inside my chest. For years, I had grown used to sitting in the lowest chair, trapped in silence, treated like a shadow they could easily ignore. But now, watching them silenced, watching one of their own allies abandon them, I understood, the balance had shifted. I was no longer prey. For the first time in my life, they were the ones forced back, compelled to face a truth they could not deny. The lawyer's chair scraped loudly across the marble as he pushed it back, the harsh sound echoing through the stillness. He lifted his case, gave Jonathan a slight nod of acknowledgement, then turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a cold finality, leaving a hollow space in the room. In that instant, Margaret's face turned ghostly pale, her lips pressed into a rigid line. Edward lowered his head, hands laced tightly together, too subdued to speak. I sat there, my heart still racing, but this time, not from fear. What rose within me was something else entirely, a strange, powerful calm. For the first time, the silence in the room wasn't pressing down on me, it was bearing down on the other side of the table. Then came the thunderclap. Daniel slammed his palm against the polished wood, the sound rattling the glasses of water, his glare scorching into me. Each word he shouted seemed an attempt to shatter the air itself. "We are the real family. You don't belong here, you never did. You're just a shadow we were forced to tolerate." Sophie burst into tears, hot streaks running down her cheeks, but I could see clearly the calculation behind those wet eyes. She buried her face in her hands, her voice trembling with practiced sobs. "You've always been a freeloader, your whole life you've never taken care of yourself, always a burden, you don't deserve that money." Her crying carried no sincerity. It was the same old performance I'd witnessed countless times during family arguments. Sophie knew how to turn tears into invisible blades that cut others down. And then Margaret's voice lashed out, sharp and biting like a whip cracking against flesh. She leaned forward, finger stabbing toward me, the veins in her neck taut and raised. "We raised you for 24 years. Every meal, every piece of clothing, every single dime. Without us, you wouldn't even exist. You owe us everything, Rachel. Do you hear me?"
The quickest way to clear out stuck poop, can't go, do this to clear out stuck poop fast. On June 17th in 2019, my mom was rushed to the hospital to have what was basically a log of poop surgically removed from her colon. What happened was, when she hadn't pooped in 3 days, the doctor told her to try prune juice. And then he told her to try fiber supplements and then castor oil. And then came the prescription laxatives. But when all of these failed, and she was actually in a situation where she was in morbid danger of toxins from her poop being reabsorbed back into her body, they had to go in and admit her for surgery and with scalpels, go in and excavate the impacted poop. And as it turns out, she just had all of these layers, just layers on layers of stuck poop lining the walls of her colon. And these layers built up until it completely blocked the flow of poop. And according to Dr. Gina Sam, this might surprise you, this is actually not uncommon. Dr. Sam served as the director of the prestigious Mount Sinai Gastrointestinal Motility Center for several years in New York City. And she also was one of the first doctors to start to investigate that link between the microbiome and excess weight. She's also one of the few doctors who specializes in solving constipation, and not just on a short-term basis, but solving it for good. Now, Dr. Sam says that if you're over the age of 50, and even if you're pooping every day, yes, every single day, you could still have, get this, you could have up to 20 pounds of stuck poop lining the walls of your colon right now, just like what happened to my mom. Oh, and if you're one of those people who's pooping less than once a day, well, guess what? Get this, there's a good chance that your colon looks like this right about now. And it's not because you're not getting enough fiber or water, exercise, or anything like that. See, the muscles surrounding your digestive system, they work by squeezing food along through the stomach, kind of like when you brush your teeth and you squeeze toothpaste from the tube, right? Well, what happens is when your gut isn't well, this squeezing process, which is called peristalsis, it slows down. And this is a problem, a big problem, because when peristalsis is slow, the undigested food in your body, it doesn't have that momentum to avoid getting stuck in all of those twists and turns and grooves that are inside your intestines. Now, this is kind of gross, but hear me out. This stuck food, it literally starts rotting away. Isn't that gross? This undigested food, it's literally fermenting inside your belly. So it's no surprise that you have bloating and cramping and discomfort. But here's the thing, the problems don't stop there. This slow peristalsis, it also dries out that poop that's inside your colon. It hardens it into a literal cork that's blocking the only exit. And all the black coffee, you can drink all the prune juice, have all the psyllium, take gritty fiber, laxatives, all that stuff. All the laxatives on the planet, they're not gonna clean out that stuck poop. That's why Dr. Sam developed what poop experts now call the 7-second poop trick. It's a safe, fast, and incredibly effective way to shed up to 20 pounds. Yes, 20 pounds of stuck poop without the cramping, the squeezing, or that urgent, I've got to go to the bathroom feeling. And she just recorded a brief presentation that explains exactly how this 7-second morning ritual can give you safe, comfortable, and satisfying poops every single morning from now on. So if you're feeling backed up, if you're feeling bloated and constipated, take a minute, do yourself a favor, tap the button below this video, and you can see Dr. Sam's 7-second poop trick right now. You'll be moving things right along in no time, clearing all that stuck poop out of your bowels. Best of all, you could feel 10, 15, maybe even 20 pounds lighter for the rest of the day. Tap that button right now, and you can see Dr. Sam's 7-second morning ritual at this moment. Tap the button below this video and watch Dr. Sam's presentation right now. You can thank me later.
Everything. Her voice rose into a shout, full of fury yet trembling, as if she were clinging desperately to the only argument she had left to prove I belonged to them. The chaos of it, the shouting, the crying, the accusations, crashed into my ears like a storm I had known all my life. But instead of drowning in it, I felt myself strangely calm, almost separate from the scene. I remembered the years of eating alone in the kitchen, hearing laughter echo from the dining room beyond the door. I remembered what it felt like to stand outside the window of a family portrait, watching a world I was never allowed to step into. And in this moment, as their words rained down on me, I realized something I had never dared admit before: their accusations no longer held any weight. They were nothing but hollow echoes in a sealed room, meaningless noise against the truth already laid bare on the table. I had never owed them anything beyond the shallow gratitude of survival. Love, fairness, a rightful place in this family, those were debts they had never paid to me, not once. I let their storm rage a few moments longer, then quietly reached for my bag. All eyes followed, expecting me to fumble for tissues or stammer some excuse. Instead, I drew out a checkbook I had prepared long ago. Tearing free a crisp slip, the numbers glinted stark against the pale paper like the blade of a knife. I placed it in the center of the table, sliding it toward Margaret. The figure was plain, $60,000. The room froze. Even the sound of breathing seemed to stop. I met Margaret's eyes, my voice steady but ringing through the heavy air. Here. $60,000, the exact amount you tallied, down to every penny, for raising me 24 years. I'm paying it back in full. Now we owe each other nothing. Margaret stared at the check as if it had transformed into a venomous snake before her. Her lips trembled, her hand rigid on the table, unable to reach for it. Daniel frowned, leaning forward, but his eyes no longer burned with certainty, only shock and the beginnings of doubt. Sophie, tears still streaking her face, pressed a hand to her mouth, her shoulders quaking, whether with rage or with fear I couldn't tell. In that moment, my chest felt weightless, as though I had finally shed the chain I'd worn since the first day I entered the Whitman house. For years, they had repeated like scripture that I should be grateful, that every meal and every garment was a debt I could never repay. But today, I had put an end to that. I owed them nothing, and they had no reason left to bind me inside the cage they dared to call family. The room fell into a strange silence after the last signatures were scrawled across the pages. Jonathan gathered the documents, his voice calm but resolute. From this moment, any attempt to contest this is void. The agreement is legally binding, effective immediately. In the corner, the photocopier hummed, spitting out copies that landed one by one with a finality like a gavel strike. He handed a copy to each of them. I did not reach for mine. I only watched, knowing each page was the period at the end of 24 years shackled by so-called gratitude. Margaret sat motionless, the pen still in her hand, her fingers trembling too much to release it. Her face had drained of color, her eyes vacant, as though she had just lost the weapon she had wielded all her life. Sophie bowed her head, tears dripping onto the papers as she muttered something that sounded like unfair, but no one cared to listen. Daniel, always the loudest, now slumped back in his chair.
Donc, pour ceux qui viennent de nous rejoindre, un petit récap. Donc, la fille se retrouve dans un bureau avec les avocats de sa mère et de ses oncles. Tu vois, vous voyez. Et donc, ils lui disent, ouais, bon, de toute façon, tu as adopté, donc l'argent à la grand-mère n'a pas voulu, laissez-moi te donner, elle était malade, elle était ceci. Raconte toute une histoire sur la fille. Donc la fille me dit, ah, Joey, elle fait comment maintenant? Je suis seul parmi tous les membres de la famille là. Tous les gens me faisaient comprendre qu'il était adopté aujourd'hui là. C'est ça, c'est là même que c'est sorti même. Donc, pendant l'attente, il y a quelqu'un qui rentre dans la salle. Et tous regardent le monsieur. Ils connaissent le monsieur. C'est un avocat de la famille. L'avocat maintenant sort et puis leur dit, ah, voilà ce que votre mère a décidé. Voilà. Pour les finis même là, il leur dit que la mère a mis dans ses documents que ça lui a coûté $60,000 pour éduquer la fille, enfin, pour éduquer sa petite fille. Vous voyez. Donc, il a un chèque de $60,000. Il dit voilà votre $60,000. Moi, il pas mes 3 millions. Et puis, notre relation s'arrête là. Ils ont failli s'évanouir dans la salle. Donc, on continue.
His gaze dark, his jaw clenched, his shoulders taut with impotent rage. I stood. The screech of my chair against the marble rang sharp, forcing their eyes up to me. I looked at each of them, not with anger, but with a finality forged in years of endurance. Family, I said slowly, each word deliberate, is not a pack of cold-blooded calculators, not people who turn love into a debt to be collected. If that is your definition, then from this moment, I am no longer part of it. The words landed like a heavy door slamming shut behind someone who had once thought themselves master. Margaret flinched, her lips moving but no sound escaping. Sophie turned away, clutching her copy of the agreement to her chest like a flimsy shield. Daniel glared at me, but behind the fury in his eyes I glimpsed something smaller, fear. Fear of losing his place, fear of the wall he had always hidden behind crumbling away. For the first time, I felt the room itself tilt. I had always been the one cornered, the one pressed down, while they commanded. But now, they were the ones forced to sign, forced to bow before a truth that could no longer be denied. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. Word of that meeting somehow slipped into the world, and within weeks, the shockwaves spread across Denver. I remember one morning during a hospital shift, a colleague handed me the local paper. The financial section carried a headline in bold print: Whitman Realty loses $1 million contract amid allegations of mismanagement. Below it was a photo of Margaret leaving a building, head lowered, cameras flashing all around her. A major developer had pulled its deal after whispers spread about her attempt to manipulate an inheritance. And when reporters began digging deeper, the cracks in the company's finances quickly showed.
The best vitamin for sciatic nerve pain will absolutely shock you. If you have sciatic nerve pain,
Within a month, the $10 million business she had once flaunted as her pride had fallen into a state tax investigation. Edward fared no better. The uncle who had once sat across from me, voice steady and threatening that he could have my nursing license revoked, suddenly became the subject of headlines from the Colorado Bar Association. The statement was short and cold: formal reprimand for ethical misconduct issued to former attorney Edward Whitman. Though retired, the fact that he had lent his consulting name to a scheme to manipulate will force the council to act. I later heard from a colleague that he would be barred from participating in any legal activity whatsoever, even informal advising. Reading those lines, I felt no triumph, no sweetness of revenge. Only a quiet calm settled inside me, like an old wound finally stitched shut. Not erased, but sealed, a reminder that justice can come slowly, but when it arrives, it carries enough weight to shake even the walls that once seemed unbreakable. Daniel was the first to fall. News of his removal from the family company spread quickly, not as rumor but in the form of a curt internal memo: management contract terminated due to unreliability. I was told that on the day he packed his things, his face still bore that practiced arrogance, but his eyes flickered with disbelief, as though even he couldn't accept that the privileges he had believed eternal could vanish overnight. I remembered so vividly that teenage summer when he sat grinning behind the wheel of a brand new Jeep Cherokee, applause and champagne toasts surrounding him, while I clutched my worn shoes on the porch. Back then, I thought the gap between us was permanent. But now, watching him walk out of the office building with nothing but a cardboard box holding a few photos and a notebook, I realized those so-called walls of permanence had been nothing but illusions. Sophie's downfall came differently. She wasn't thrown out immediately, but her glamorous life crumbled layer by layer. Maxed-out credit cards, lavish parties, handbags worth thousands, all of it came crashing back like a wave of debt swallowing her whole. I stumbled across a real estate listing for her luxury condo. The glossy photos showed the wood-paneled living room, the sun-drenched windows, the balcony overlooking downtown Denver, the same condo she had once bragged about over family dinners, now posted with a stark caption: urgent sale to settle debts. I stared at the screen for a long time. That had once been a world I was never allowed to touch, where laughter and wine spilled over marble countertops while I scrubbed dishes in the kitchen. Now that world was gone, replaced by the silence of an empty apartment waiting for a new owner. I didn't feel glee. Only a vague sadness, like watching bricks fall one by one from what had seemed an indestructible house. But at the same time, I saw clearly, every privilege they'd used to look down on me was built on nothing. Without truth, without love, it had no foundation at all. Perhaps that was the moment I understood Eleanor's words in full: blood doesn't make a family. Love does. Because what Daniel and Sophie had lost wasn't just money or property. They had lost the mask of family, a mask they had worn too long to hide the emptiness beneath. When the last storms quieted, I knew I couldn't leave the inheritance sitting idle in my account like some private trophy. Eleanor never wanted her legacy trapped in petty squabbles. She wanted it to touch real lives, to reach those left behind. So I used the entire sum to transform an old warehouse on East Colfax into the Eleanor Whitman Community Clinic, a place where anyone could walk through the doors, no matter who they were, where they came from, or how much money they had. The wooden sign carved with her name hung right above the entrance, and every time I looked at it, I felt as though Eleanor's gentle smile was there again. We managed to hire 2 doctors who had grown up in the neighborhood, a group of young nurses, and even a pharmacist who had once been a patient at the hospital where I worked. They didn't come just for a job, they came because they shared the belief that healthcare should never be a privilege. On opening day, I had no idea how many people would come. I stood on the front steps, gripping my clipboard so tightly my knuckles whitened, nerves buzzing like it was my very first shift as a nurse all over again. Then they began arriving, a young mother with 2 small children in tow, an elderly man leaning on a shaky cane, a young immigrant guiding in his mother who spoke no English. They kept coming, one after another. By the end of the day, we had served 120 patients. 120 people, 120 stories, 120 pairs of eyes shining with relief at receiving care they had once believed they had no right to expect. That evening, as I stepped outside, I looked up once more at the wooden sign. Under the glow of the street lamp, the words Eleanor Whitman Community Clinic gleamed quietly but warmly. I whispered, "Do you see, Eleanor? I did it. You didn't just leave me money, you left me the belief that everyone deserves to be treated with humanity." And for the first time in many years, I no longer felt like the outsider in a family. I had built a new family of my own, in my own way. I held the newspaper in my hands for a long time, my eyes fixed on the headline printed boldly across the front page, "Nurse once rejected by her family becomes community lifeline." The words felt both familiar and strange, like a mirror held up to the path I had walked. Rejected by her family, that label had weighed on me since the day I stepped into the Whitman home with a bag of second-hand clothes. But community lifeline, never in my life had I imagined those words would one day describe me. Yet here they were, staring back at me in bold black ink. I remembered that first day at the clinic, when patients began to walk through the doors. A young mother asked timidly if she had to pay anything, and when I told her no, her eyes filled with tears as though a 1,000-pound burden had lifted from her shoulders. An old man with trembling hands signed his intake form and murmured, "I thought I'd never see a doctor again." I remembered the shy smile of the immigrant son who brought his mother in, bowing slightly as he offered a thank you in broken English. Those small moments, added together, gave me the answer I had been searching for. Eleanor's legacy wasn't a number in a bank account. It was the power to turn an idea into a refuge for people who had nowhere else to turn. That night, I brought the newspaper back to the clinic and placed it on the old wooden desk beside Eleanor's photo. The picture showed her on an ordinary day, not dressed in a country club gown but in her favorite cream sweater, her silver hair tied back, her smile kind and unguarded. I rested my hand on the edge of the frame, my chest tightening. "Eleanor, now I understand, you never meant to leave me just money. You left me courage, the courage to stand tall and say no. You left me the belief that love is what makes a family. And you left me the strength to keep walking, even when everyone else turns away." In that moment, I realized I was no longer the child left out of family photographs, no longer the woman bowing her head under shouted accusations. I had found my place, not in the cold halls of the Whitman house, but in the smiles and trembling thank yous of a new community. And that, to me, was worth more than any inheritance. I sat in the clinic at the end of the day, the yellow light spilling across a hallway still tinged with the scent of disinfectant, and a strange peace filled me. For so many years, I had believed my worth had to be measured by what others gave me or whether they acknowledged me. But now, looking at the newspaper with the headline Community Lifeline lying beside Eleanor's photo, I knew the truth had never been clearer. I spoke aloud, softly but firmly, my words echoing through the empty room. The greatest inheritance I received wasn't $3 million. The greatest inheritance was the self-respect I learned to hold on to, and the love Eleanor planted in me the day I first walked into that house. When I finished, I touched the edge of her photo frame, feeling warmth spread through my chest. Money can be lost, contracts can collapse, reputations can crumble. But self-respect and love, once rooted in your heart, will remain, no matter the storms outside. I turned to the camera, drawing in a steady breath to keep my voice low and firm. If it were you, would you choose self-respect over holding onto a false peace? Maybe that choice would cost you a name in the family tree, maybe a few people who thought they had the right to dictate your life. But in return, you would find peace in knowing you stood up, that you chose yourself. I let the silence linger, enough for the question to settle in. Then I gave a small nod, my voice softening but carrying clear, "Share this story with someone who needs a little strength to protect themselves. And don't forget to subscribe to Family Ashes, where family secrets burn down to ash."
Did you know that QuickBooks users find an average of $6,000 in tax savings? Run your business of one with QuickBooks.
Ben voilà, l'histoire est terminée. Vraiment, vraiment, c'était chaud. C'était chaud. Non, finalement, elle a récupéré ses 3 millions. elle a décidé d'aller créer un centre de santé. So for my English speakers, she decided to take the $3 million and use it to create a clinic where people can come and use, um, I guess, have doctors look at them, check them, but it's all for free. It's all for free. She all self-funded, so it's a great story, great end of the story. You know, the the moral of the story is that you love who you want to love, how you want to love them, right? Regardless if you are adopted, you are blood child, whatever, you're supposed to love everybody. You're supposed to love everybody the same. And the other thing about it is that also make sure you have the right connection, right? If it wasn't for the lawyer, if it wasn't for the grandma putting it into the lawyer, Daddy wouldn't have a penny. She wouldn't have a penny right now on her name. So it's a good thing that she had. At least a good thing that the grandmother thought of having or giving her that lawyer. Otherwise, she would have been cooked like bacon. She would have been cooked. So it was a good thing. So I'm happy for her. She's getting the money. She's getting the thing that she need to get. So that's all good. So that was the end of tea time with Boyaka. So we talk to you tomorrow, same time, same place. I usually stream every day around 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's for those who are in the United States. You can do the conversion. So it's like, the middle of the day. And I do one story English, one story French, because I do speak French. I hope to see you on to the next. So now we're going to listen a bit of music and then, we're going to close the live. Thank you for your time.